Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you look at a page of text and try to memorize the information, but after a few minutes you realize that nothing has stuck? Perhaps you were preparing for a new exam, a presentation at work, or just trying to retain new information. But it feels like your brain is resisting. Information slips away like sand through fingers. Why is it so difficult to keep everything we need in our heads? In fact, memorization can be much easier than it seems. The problem is not that you have a bad memory, but that you are likely using the wrong approaches. The good news is that with the right methods, anyone can learn to memorize information faster and more effectively. Let's break down how to achieve this and why memorization is not as difficult as you think. Very often people say they have a poor memory, but in reality, memory is a skill that can be developed. Imagine a muscle. If you don't train it, it weakens. But if you work on it, it becomes stronger. The same goes for memory. The more you train your ability to remember, the better it becomes. For example, when I was in school, I thought I had a poor memory. Every time before exams, I tried to cram the material, spending hours over textbooks. But by the time of the test, everything seemed to evaporate. Since then, I started looking for more effective ways to learn, and you know what? It worked. I realized that the issue wasn't with memory, but with how I approached the memorization process. But before we delve into specific methods, let's consider why traditional memorization techniques often do not yield the desired results. When you simply reread the material over and over, it creates an illusion of knowledge. You feel familiar with the information, but that doesn't mean it has been stored in long-term memory. Many of us are used to learning through rote memorization. We quickly review the material before an exam or an important meeting. We try to cram as much data into our heads as possible in a short amount of time. The problem is that this method only works for short-term memory. After just a few days, the information disappears. One of my friends tried for a long time to memorize historical dates in exactly this way. He studied for several hours a day, repeating the material over and over. But when it was time for the exam, his memory let him down. When he decided to try other techniques, which I will discuss later, his results improved significantly. There are many techniques that can help you memorize material more easily and quickly. Let's break down a few of them. Associations and images. Our brain remembers information better when it is connected to vivid images and associations. This is because images activate more areas of the brain than simple words. When you try to remember a fact, create a picture in your mind that will be associated with it. The more unusual and vivid this picture is, the better. For example, when I was learning foreign languages, I tried to come up with vivid associations for each word. For instance, the Spanish word gato means cat. I remembered it. Imagine a cat that is petting itself. This funny picture immediately fixed the word in my memory. And once, when I was studying new terms for a project, I associated them with well-known characters from movies. This not only helped to memorize complex words more quickly, but also made the learning process more engaging. The method of the memory palace. The method of Loci or memory palace is one of the oldest memorization techniques, used by the ancient Greeks and Romans. The essence of the method is to imagine a familiar place, such as a house or a street, and to place the information that needs to be remembered there. For example, when I needed to remember the structure of a complex article for work, I imagined walking through my apartment and leaving an important thesis in each room. Later, at the right moment, I mentally walked through this apartment and recalled where everything was. By applying this technique, I was able not only to remember the key points of the article but also to recount its structure to my colleagues without hesitation. This is a great method for those who prefer to visualize information and enjoy creative approaches. By the way, the world champion in memorizing numbers, Ben Pridmore, uses this technique to remember hundreds of digits in the correct sequence. He says that associations with real places can significantly improve the process of storing information and dividing it into blocks. One of the best ways to memorize a large amount of information is to break it down into small blocks. When we try to remember something complex and extensive, our brain can get stuck. But if we divide the information into small portions, the task becomes significantly easier. For me personally, it was a real revelation when I was preparing for my first big presentation. Instead of memorizing the entire speech at once, I broke it down into several parts and learned one part at a time. This allowed me to avoid overloading my brain and at the same time remember everything much faster. My colleague at work, who often speaks in front of large audiences, also uses this technique. He compares memorization to preparing for a marathon. You can't run the entire distance at once, but you can do it gradually in parts, increasing the distance each time. Repetition with intervals. Spaced repetition is a method that involves repeating information at increasing intervals. The idea is that each time you repeat the material, the intervals between repetitions become longer. For example, repeat something after an hour, then after a day, after 3 days, and so on. I often use this method myself when I learn something new. For example, I am studying a foreign language. When I started learning Spanish, I noticed that if I repeat the words I have learned a few hours later, then the next day and a week later, they stick much better than if I try to learn everything at once. I gradually increased the intervals of repetition and noticed how the words stayed in memory for a long time. This method uses the language learning app Duolingo and exam preparation services such as Anki. They specifically choose moments to repeat words or facts depending on your successes. In this way, you constantly refresh your knowledge. Active use of information. One of the most effective ways to reinforce information is through its active use. When you learn something new, try to explain it to another person. This process is called learning through teaching. When you try to convey information, you reinforce it in your memory and better understand where you have difficulties. When I first started studying concepts in psychology, explaining these ideas to friends helped me. They did not always understand immediately what I meant, and I had to look for new ways to explain. This helped me not only to better absorb the material but also to understand it more deeply. By the way, this method is actively used in educational institutions. Many university professors advise students to find study partners and explain complex topics to each other. This not only helps to memorize the material but also teaches critical thinking. There are several additional tricks that can make the memorization process even easier and more enjoyable. Here are a few of them. Use the Feynman method. Richard Feynman, a renowned physicist, proposed a memorization technique that involves the following. To understand and remember something, explain it in simple language as if you were telling it to a child. This makes you delve deeper into the essence of the issue and simplify the information for better understanding. When you can explain a topic in simple words, it means you have truly understood and remembered it. Engage in physical activity. Surprisingly, physical activity helps to remember information better. When you move, processes in the brain are activated that improve cognitive functions. I often use this life hack when I need to remember something important. I go for a walk and mentally repeat the material I studied. This not only helps me better absorb the information but also gives my brain a chance to relax. Create rituals for studying. Everyone has their own triggers that initiate the memorization process. I have certain rituals before I sit down to study. I brew a cup of coffee and find a quiet place. These actions prepare my brain for learning something important right now, and the information will be easier to remember. You can create your own rituals that will help you focus and better absorb the material. There is also a plan on how to study effectively and memorize information in our Telegram channel. Follow the link in the description. Emotions play a huge role in the memorization process. When information evokes strong emotions in us, it is remembered much better. Remember how many movies or even random events you recall because they triggered vivid feelings. This is a natural process. Our brain is structured in such a way that it remembers better what is associated with emotional experiences. Put this into practice. When you learn something new, try to connect the information with emotions. For example, if you are studying historical events, try to imagine yourself in the place of the people experiencing those events. How would you feel at that moment? It helps to create an emotional connection with the material and remember it better. Agree that memorization is an important skill, but here's the question. Is it always worth striving to remember everything? In fact, no. Our brain, like a computer, has a certain amount of RAM. If we try to remember everything we have ever encountered, it will lead to cognitive overload. That is why it is important to be able to filter information and forget what is no longer needed. For example, when I was studying, I tried to memorize absolutely everything that was in the textbooks and lectures. This caused stress and overload. Over time, I realized that it is important not just to memorize everything indiscriminately, but to be able to highlight the main points. It's like sorting files on a computer. Unnecessary ones go to the trash. Important ones go into a separate folder. Memorization is not a supernatural ability. It is a skill that can be developed using the right methods and approaches. Each of us is capable of memorizing information faster and more easily if we find the approach that works best for us. Apply different techniques, don't be afraid to experiment, and most importantly, do it with interest. After all, memorizing the material. This is the first step on the path to new knowledge and success in life. A final question for you. What memorization methods work best for you? This concludes our discussion, and now I am curious to know your opinion. What techniques are you already using and which ones do you plan to try? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to hear your point of view. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you found this video helpful, and share your thoughts on how we can improve our content. Thank you for your attention, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye everyone.